Hi guys, and welcome to every episode of The Simpsons Season 33 reviewed. As of this season, I am officially caught up with the show. I half expected to never reach this point when I started this series, over 3 years ago now, but you know what, I'm gonna give myself a little pat on the back for sticking with it and getting it done. And of course a massive thanks to you guys that have watched it, which in turn has kept up my motivation to actually do it. The thing is, season 34 is almost finished now, so I will probably wait to do that one before I do any overall review video for The Simpsons, or move on to a new show. I also have some other ideas for some quicker, easier to make content, just so I can get videos out on a more regular basis, in between the more longer projects. If you want to know more about that and want to have a vote on it, go over to the community section on my channel because I've put a post up on there. As far as this season goes, as ever I write this intro before watching the episodes, so I'm hoping for something good. I know a lot of people view this season as a step up from the recent ones, so I really hope I end up agreeing with that. Anyway, enough waiting, let's find out. Season 33, Episode 1, The Star of the Backstage. A musical comes to Springfield, and Marge stages a revival of her high school show, but is soon threatened by the return of a rival from her past. So my trivia for this one is that the songs in the episode pays homage to the musicals Chicago, Wicked, The Music Man, and Rent. And my best moment was Moe's reaction to finding out Barney and Sarah slept together. So the season opener gets a 2 out of 5. To give this episode some credit, it was ambitious to go for a full-on musical, and even though I'm not usually the biggest fan of them, we haven't had one in a while, so I was okay with it. Also, Marge and her group wanting to relive their high school days isn't a bad basis for an episode. However, there were a number of small issues which got in the way of my enjoyment. For a start, the singing occasionally feels a bit out of tempo with the music, and the lip syncing even looked off at times. Then we have the whole timeline issue again, of Marge being a teen in 1999, which I have kind of accepted by this point, but it still sticks out like a sore thumb whenever it comes up. I'm also not digging Dr. Hibbert's new voice at all. It doesn't sound like the old character we know, it just lacks that jovial, sarcastic tint, which really made the character. To go with the many nitpicks I had, the ending here doesn't stick the landing either. Marge still kind of feels left out by her friends, but apparently it's a happy ending now, because a few young stage managers look up to her and take her to dinner. It's not convincing at all. Amongst a sea of unfunny jokes, there were at least a few I liked. Lenny hurting his leg was one, but my favourite was Moe not quite being able to believe that Barney apparently had sex with Sasha back in high school. Drunken Barney does have a surprising amount of success with the ladies, doesn't he? Season 33, Episode 2, Bart's in Jail. When Grandpa falls victim to a phone scammer, the Simpsons set out on a mission to get his money back. My trivia for this one is that during the pension montage, Here Comes the Money by Naughty by Nature plays, and any wrestling fan will instantly recognise that as Shane McMahon's theme. And my best moment was the ending. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. This was a very solid 4 rated episode, on the higher end of that rating even. It had both good character stuff and some nice satire. For a start, this was quite an accurate run through of how scams work. The episode was quite cynical in its approach, not glossing over the fact that there are a lot of scumbags out there willing to con vulnerable people out of their money. It showed off different types of scams, from simple phone ones targeting elderly people, all the way up to complicated pyramid schemes. The reveal that it was not only one guy that scammed Abe, but a whole office full of people working like a business, was a very realistic take. Even the ending, despite technically being a happy one for Marge and the family, was a bit cynical. It was a nice gesture from Abe to try and restore Marge's trust in people by giving her back the money himself, as she was losing her trust throughout the episode. However, the fact that he had to do that is basically the episode saying, yeah, you shouldn't really trust people. As a subversive ending, I thought it was well done. The cynical tone does not make the episode depressing though, thanks to some good character work and jokes. Abe is actually surprisingly positive here, and rebounds well after being scammed. Homer even comes around to forgive him, after realizing that he can get scammed himself. As I alluded to, there were also a fair few funny moments here, like Homer telling Abe, "I wish you lived forever," after realizing that he had no inheritance coming, was the pick of the bunch. I definitely enjoyed this one quite a lot. Season 33, Episode 3, Treehouse of Horror 32. The 3 short stories this year are Pong Joon-ho's This Side of Parasite, Nightmare on Elm Tree, and Dead Ringer. My trivia for this one is that Mr. Sparkle from the episode In Marge We Trust makes an appearance here. And my best moment was Lisa watching the cursed TikTok. This year's Halloween episode gets a 2 out of 5. Yeah, this was an incredibly disappointing Treehouse of Horror that was only saved from being a 1 by the last segment, Dead Ringer, because the first 2 were creatively bankrupt. Part 1 was a parody of the movie Parasite, but unlike other movie parodies the show has done, like The Shining for example, they didn't really make this one their own. Literally, the segment plays out just like the movie Parasite, which isn't that bad, I guess, but it kind of leaves me thinking, what's the point? If you aren't going to try and put your own spin on the movie, then there is no need to bother. Also, Mr. Burns appearing at the end felt so out of place. The second part was also very uninspired. I mean, they have done the monsters come to life and attack the town so many times before, I don't know why they thought adding trees into the mix would give it the kick it needed. Just like the first part, it may have upped the death count, but it certainly didn't up the laugh count. The final part was fine at least. I like the use of TikTok as a thing which gets all the kids in trouble. That may well be true in real life as well, just not in the form of a ghost girl killing you. Lisa showing some bravery by calling out the girl and befriending her was a nice moment, even if the ending was kind of tame. As I said though, one of the worst Halloween episodes, which is lucky not to be getting a 1. Season 33, Episode 4, The Wayz We Were. While stuck in traffic, Mo notices Maya, and the two decide to give their relationship another chance. My trivia for this one is that the song Traffic Jam by James Taylor plays during the traffic jam. And my best moment was the ending. This one gets a 2 out of 5. So they indeed decided to bring Maya back for good in this episode. Now of course, if they were going to do this, they should have just had them stay together originally, which I said at the time, but there you go. Most of the plot here was not well done in my opinion. Maya did not get much time here to express herself, so because of that I struggled to see why she came back to Mo. She said she never should have left, but never explained why. The whole thing could have been much more impactful than it was, is all I'm saying. Some of Mo's bits of him trying to fight his own inner insecurities were okay but a bit overdone. They should have used less time on that, and more time building up Mo and Maya's relationship. I did at least like the ending. It was just nice to see Mo actually have a nice ending. I just hope they do something with this status quo change going forward. The jokes were not great, as this episode was on the boring side, but Mo telling Homer, "Your wife's an idiot," after Marge told him to just trust in love, was a good one. Season 33, Episode 5, Lisa's Belly. Marge unwittingly calls Lisa chunky, which causes her to feel insecure about her weight. My trivia about this one is that the Powerpuff Girls appear in Lisa's dream, where they get crushed by the chunky sign. And my best moment was Patty and Selma teaching Lisa to not care about what other people think. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. On the face of it, the big conflict here doesn't seem that serious. Marge just called Lisa chunky in a playful way, and that's enough to play on her mind. It is quite realistic though. Even if parents mean well, they can often say things to their kids which upsets them and affects them in a negative way. Whether it should affect them or not is irrelevant, because when someone is Lisa's age, they will be more likely to take things to heart. Now, if an adult was to get this upset by being called a mildly bad name, then yes, it probably would be time for them to get some thicker skin. That's why I enjoyed Patty and Selma not giving a crap. I mean, it's probably not the best idea to be fat for the sake of your own health, but ultimately it is up to each of us how we want to look after ourselves. And if someone wants to say screw it and not give a damn, and doesn't care what anyone thinks or says to them, then fair play really. The ending was a bit abrupt though. I would have liked a more convincing moment between Marge and Lisa. There was some fun to be had here to balance out Lisa's grumpiness. Homer taking the kids to this dangerous slide was a good time, even though it was very irresponsible from him. I also liked Helen's line about Jessica Lovejoy. and the credits scene showing the mean words that lived in everyone's head. Season 33, Episode 6. A Serious Flanders, Part 1. A ruthless debt collector comes to Springfield, and Homer and Ned become his targets. My trivia for this one is that the Tween's Gambit is a parody of the Queen's Gambit, which is an opening in chess if you didn't know, and it's also the name of a Netflix show about chess. My best moment was the shootout at Lard Lad Donuts. The first part of this two-parter gets a 4 out of 5. Unlike the other two-parters this show has attempted since Who Shot Mr. Burns, this one seems to be working. It hit hard right out of the gate with this mafia-style group killing the rich Texan. I kind of thought he was killed off for good to be honest, but then it wisely, in my opinion, revealed that it was all going to be non-canon. I say wisely because we all know that regular characters are not going to be killed off, but knowing that this two-parter is essentially its own story really allows them to throw some surprises at you. The head guy of the group is pretty intimidating. They did a good job of building him up into this force to be feared. The scene with him and Fat Tony's gang was great as far as that goes, so I am interested in seeing how it plays out, with him, Homer and Ned in the second part. There was also a few decent gags here, like the gang mistaking Homer for Flanders because of all the property of Ned Flanders stuff he has, as well as the scene of the henchpeople threatening Comic Book Guy. He still can't help but be sarcastic, even in that situation. Overall though, this part was not amazingly funny, but that was fine because it succeeded at building the drama and getting me wanting to see the second part. I really hope it doesn't disappoint. Let's find out straight away, shall we, with Season 33, Episode 7, A Serious Flanders Part 2. I'm not going to run through the plot synopsis again, but I do have some new trivia, which was the song Las Vegas Tango by Gary Burton plays when Homer is going to Wyoming, and my best moment was the ending. Part 2 gets another 4 out of 5. I don't think it was quite as good as part 1, but it was still pretty good. I like how they tied Ned's grandfather back into the main villain. I also thought Ned was characterized very well. He was always trying to do the right thing, so it was the right decision to have him get the better of the bad guy in the end. I like how he just kind of looked at his defeated foe with disappointment, as he now has to go back and try and rebuild his life. Now I know some people in the Simpsons community have actually criticized these episodes for being non-canon, arguing that it made this two-parter feel meaningless. While I do respect that point of view, I don't agree with it. The Simpsons has always had one-off episodes which play around with their continuity, and it was fairly clear that this was a parody-type experiment. As far as it feeling meaningless, I don't really think it did. I found it to be quite action-filled and entertaining. I mean, are you really telling me that you would prefer the show to not experiment and stick to normal run-of-the-mill stories just because they are canon? Maybe in a classic era I would agree with that, but not at this point in the show's run. Absolutely not. Anyway, to round off, I had a good time with this two-parter, and I'm glad this season seems to be willing to shake things up a little. Season 33, Episode 8, Portrait of a Lackey on Fire. Smithers finds love with a famous fashion designer, but soon finds out that he has an evil side. So the name of this episode is a reference to the 2019 film, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and my best moment was Marge following Homer all the way to the bus stop. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was okay, but no more than that. Smithers being fed up by Burns and trying to get a boyfriend is nothing new, and Lisa being the one to uncover this guy's indiscretions was also a predictable way to go. That being said, they did at least try to make Michael stand out by showing off his flamboyant personality, and of course his wealth made it even harder for Smithers to turn him down. At least he got a puppy out of it in the end. What helped make this episode a bit more enjoyable was a number of good moments mixed in at various points. I liked how amazed Mr. Burns was by his jigsaw puzzles, and Marge following Homer around desperate to know more about Michael I found surprisingly funny. I just liked how she was always right there, in the other car or at the bus stop. No matter what Homer tried to do, he could not get away from her. I don't know, I guess I just find it realistic that Marge would be obsessed by a famous TV fashion designer. She seems like the type who would watch his show while at home during the day. Season 33, Episode 9, Mothers and Other Strangers. We flash back to when a teenage Homer and Grandpa took a road trip to look for Mona. So some information about this one is that part of the scene where Bart skateboards naked during the Simpsons movie is shown while Bart is flipping through the channels. And my best moment was that bit of Bart watching himself from the Simpsons movie. This one gets a 1 out of 5. So this rating is basically just because of my own pet peeves and annoyances. If the things I'm about to mention don't bother you, then I'm sure you will enjoy this one a bit more than me. Right, for a start, there is this obvious continuity issue regarding the episode Mother Simpson. In that episode, Homer thought Mona died when he was a kid, but here it's revealed he knew she was alive all along. Now, I don't normally make a big deal out of continuity issues. I can usually accept the floating timeline for what it is, but when you completely ignore and essentially redo a key part of Homer's childhood, then it's a bit too far in my opinion. I mean, it's one thing to retcon a classic episode, but this is kind of a key part of Homer's character. His feelings and actions can be looked at from a totally different perspective based on what he knew about his mom growing up. So because of that, I find it hard to give this a pass. It wasn't just that annoyed me here though. The ending of Homer choosing to save Abe instead of going after Mona is kind of similar to what they pulled a few seasons back with Mona's recipe box. It worked on that occasion, not so much second time around. In general, I think it would be wise for the show to lay off Mona, Abe and Homer flashback episodes now. They are struggling to keep fitting in new parts to their backstory in a way which makes any degree of sense. The jokes don't make up for the story either. The only decent moment was Bart casually commenting on his role of the movie when it came up on a Netflix type service. Season 33, Episode 10, A Made Maggie. Fat Tony becomes godfather to Maggie after he saves her from a falling piano. My trivia for this one is that the On Ice show Fat Tony invited the Simpsons to go see is called Itchy and Scratchy's Christmas on Ice, which spoofs several On Ice shows. And my best moment was just Grandpa's incompetence at babysitting. This one gets a 3 out of 5. The core of this episode was fine, but it's a very familiar story, and it was obvious what the outcome would be. We have seen a few people form a bond with Maggie over the years, most notably Moe in Moe's Baby Blues. This tried to follow a similar path, but it never carried the emotional impact that episode did, and the conflict between Marge and Fat Tony here was nowhere near as impactful as the one between Homer and Moe in that episode. It didn't really make much sense for Marge to be so worried about Maggie not being baptized, given that neither Bart or Lisa are. I mean, does she not care if those two go to hell? It's only Maggie she's worried about. Also, while I do appreciate trying to show Fat Tony's more sensitive side, he was always going to go back to a life of crime, so you never really fully bought into it. There were a few good moments here and jokes to just about get this to a 3 though. Grandpa's babysitting was good fun, him mistaking Maggie for Snowball, and his rant about anti-rambling medication were quite funny. I also liked Carl saying that Lenny can't decide about being Maggie's godfather for him, only to let Moe decide for him right after. Season 33, Episode 11, The Longest Marge. Marge and Mr. Burns fight to be the mentor of a brash young football prodigy. So the title of this episode is a reference to the film The Longest Yard, and my best moment was Bart fighting Grayson. This one gets a 3 out of 5. This was an okay episode that had nice pacing, generally nice animation, and a simple, easy to follow story. Basically, it was competent in all aspects, but failed to ever turn into something great. Grayson was a decent character, I thought. He brought some energy to drive things forward. I can't say that Mr. Burns and Marge fighting over him was all that, but at least the ending where we saw them both left in the dark worked well. It was like he finally got a real taste of life after being raised solely on football, so he's now ready to go out and live a normal life in the real world. I did like how that all came together. This wasn't that funny really, but there were a few okay moments. I liked the opposing football team getting back on the bus early. Also, Bart fighting with Grayson, like they were real brothers, with Lisa egging them on, was quite fun. Season 33, Episode 12, Pixelated and Afraid. Homer and Marge get lost in an icy wilderness. With no way to call for help, they must push themselves to their limits to survive. My trivia for this one is that the scene where Homer uses the phone to start a fire is a reference to the 2016 recall of Samsung Galaxy phones, after there were reports of the phone's batteries exploding while charging. My best moment was Homer and Marge fighting off and killing the Wolverine. So this episode gets a 5 out of 5. It felt good to say that again, to be honest. Indeed, we finally have another 5 rated episode. The last one was Brick Like Me, back in season 25. Act 1 of this was quite pedestrian, but I liked how it set up the character dynamic between Homer and Marge straight away. It may seem to someone like Lisa, who has her own idealistic ideas of what romance is, that they are in some kind of rut, but Homer and Marge genuinely do enjoy just spending time together, whether it be watching TV or staring at the sunset, like in the ending. The episode got my respect fairly quickly, as Acts 2 and 3 were solely devoted to Homer and Marge trying to survive together out in the middle of nowhere. If you're going to try this premise, then you have to fully commit to it, and they did. It did not sugarcoat Homer and Marge's dire situation, and there was no cutaways back to the Simpsons house to check in on Bart and Lisa. It was purely Homer and Marge surviving and even learning to make the best out of their time together. I think it helps my enjoyment of this episode that I have always been into survival shows anyway, so seeing them making fires and camps out of their surroundings intrigues me more than it probably does with most people. As I said though, the most impactful scene for me was with the Wolverine. I like how they treated it as a serious threat, and Homer finding a way to trap and kill it with a tree branch was exactly what should have happened. In real life, if that situation occurred, it would have been either Homer or the Wolverine being killed after all, and you can't kill Homer obviously, so there was only one option left. I already said I liked the ending. It called back to the start of the episode well, and it wisely avoided tacking on an argument between the two. This episode worked great just as a celebration of Homer and Marge's relationship and how much they really care for each other, and that has never been shown as starkly in the show as it was here. Another thing going for this episode was the great animation. Some of the wilderness scenes and colours were beautifully done, and complement the atmosphere of the episode so well. The only thing not quite as good here was the comedy, as there are hardly any funny moments really. Now clearly this episode wasn't trying to be a gag heavy one, but I still have to mention it as a small criticism if I'm trying to compare it to other great episodes from the series. All in all though, I greatly enjoyed this unique episode. It's definitely up there as a top 3 HD era episode, and probably a top 10 post-classic one too. Season 33, Episode 13, Boyz N the Highlands. Bart, Martin, Nelson and Dolph are sent on a wilderness weekend together. However, things soon take a dangerous turn. My trivia for this one is that this is the first time that Martin's parents' names of Gareth and Gloria are revealed. And my best moment was Martin's rant to Bart. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. Now, after last episode, it is kind of weird to get another trapped in the wilderness story, but this also turned out pretty good, so I will take it. The basic premise here of Martin getting bullied is nothing new, but they set it up in a good way, having Bart use the same insults on Martin that the bullies used, just to impress them. Once they get split up after Nelson and Dolph leave the goat behind, Martin basically calls out Bart, and exposes his whole character right to his face. He was right as well. Although Bart tries to present himself as a rebel, he actually does care deeply what others think of him, and he will even be mean to other people who don't deserve it if it means that he can fit in. He has not only done this to Martin, but also to Ralph and Milhouse in the past. Now he is a kid after all, so we can cut him some slack, but believe me, this mindset is ever present in adults in real life too. Most people are conformists at heart, that's just the reality of it. And it's fine to want to fit in, of course, but you need to have it in you to be able to stand up against the crowd if they are doing something you believe to be wrong. That rant Martin goes on also gives you more insight into his life. It's totally believable that his parents push him too hard, and it's nice for him to finally get his frustrations off his chest. This episode is not perfect though. The character stuff is much better than the actual plot, which is quite contrived. The Satanists turned film students were quite underwhelming, as was the weird dancing ending. The subplot had the odd decent joke, like Homer saying he was scared of Jules, but for the most part this could have been like Pixelated and Afraid and had no subplot. Lisa was a bit annoying, and I don't really get her point about being left out as a middle child. I mean, it's not like Bart receives loads of time from Homer. Overall, this was more flawed than the last episode, but it still had some standout character moments, and of course, good animation again. Season 33, Episode 14. You won't believe what this episode is about. Act 3 will shock you. Homer is blamed for leaving Santa's little helper locked in a hot car. When footage of the incident goes viral, Homer becomes a pariah. My trivia for this one is that the character who comes out of the right-wing podcast house is modelled after Joe Rogan. And my best moment was the clickbait titles used to stop the group. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. So, was this episode unbelievable, and did Act 3 shock me? Well, kind of. This wasn't a typical Simpsons episode. It was heavily satirical about the internet, and how people can get dragged through the mud on it. It tried to be nuanced when it came to all the pros and cons of the internet. It showed off how there is often an overreaction from people who don't know the full facts of a situation. The townspeople all saying, "There's the people the internet told us to hate," sums that up pretty well. Innocent people will always end up getting caught in a crossfire, and it's mostly just angry people who want a scapegoat to take out all their frustrations about how disappointing their own life is. That is the brutal reality of how sad a lot of people are. It even used Mr. Burns as a stand-in for a corrupt big company who, when pressed, tries to keep up appearances by taking the moral high ground and firing Homer. The episode did make a point to show off the other side to all of this. The internet does allow more information to flow, which means that it is easier than ever before to call out horrible people who actually do deserve it. The ending of this was slightly disappointing to me, because it never really committed to a point. It felt very modern South Park-like, with the way it tried to leave the message vague, almost so people could read into it whatever they wanted. That can be a good thing, but if not done right, it can leave the whole plot feeling a bit wishy-washy. I think that's what happened here. Despite not fully sticking the landing though, this was still a thought-provoking plot that put Homer in some tough moral positions. The episode wasn't also that funny, but I did enjoy Kirk Van Houten and Helen Lovejoy not being able to resist looking at all the garbage stories though. Those two are exactly the type of people who I would expect to fall into that trap. Season 33, Episode 15, Bart the Cool Kid. When Bart befriends a kid influencer who owns an ultra cool skatewear brand, Homer leads a rebellion of loser dads against them. So the song playing at the Grill Rush Depot is so sophisticated by Rick Ross. And my best moment was just how out of place Homer and the other parents were trying to act cool. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. This was a solid enough episode. Bart making friends with this cool kid was good at first. It felt quite fresh having Bart be fashion conscious for once, and I don't think it goes against his character or anything, as we have already established in this season how much he wants to fit in. That being said, I never felt that his and Orion's friendship was strong enough to justify this emotional ending, which they were going for. As such, the bit of the business being saved never had the impact I'd have liked. Also, the credit scene of Orion and his dad apparently being clones of some kind was just weird. This ending did make some good observations about how quickly fads become uncool, or as Lisa said, what is cool is completely arbitrary and subjective anyway. As far as the comedy here, it wasn't anything special. The out-of-touch parents' pathetic attempt at being cool was the closest thing to being funny. Season 33, Episode 16, Pretty Whittle Liar. Cletus discovers that his wife, Brandine, has been hiding a secret love of learning. My trivia for this one is that Hank Hill's head, from King of the Hill of course, can be seen in this episode. And my best moment was the sculptures of the hill folk in media. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. Well, I did say last season I wasn't keen on seeing a Cletus and Brandine episode again for a while, but I should have known they can't help themselves from giving them one spotlight episode each season. As far as their fallout in this episode, I just couldn't bring myself to get invested in it. I mean, sure, it's nice that Cletus agrees to try and learn to read a book in order to connect with Brandine, but it's hardly the most hard-hitting issue, is it? The bit with Homer and Marge was also pointless. Marge being oblivious that everyone thinks she is too good for Homer does fit her character, to be fair, but we have had Homer getting insecure about his marriage many times before, and this didn't do anything to justify seeing it again. Lisa also had a bit of a side story here that was okay. It was weird to see this secret group of smart kids at Springfield Elementary, but I did like how they used the whole Wheel of Fortune to throw the bullies off their scent. That was one of the few gags in the episode which worked for me. Seeing Yosemite Sam and Bill Clinton as the best examples of hillbilly folk in the media I also liked. As you can probably tell though by the disjointed way I'm reviewing it, this episode felt weird and disjointed to me. Season 33, Episode 17. The Sound of Bleeding Gums. Lisa meets the son of Bleeding Gums Murphy and attempts to improve his life. My trivia for this one is that this episode was written by Lonnie Steele Sostan, whose brother was born deaf. This is also the first episode to feature a deaf actor in John Autry II, and my best moment was the ending. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. At first, I didn't feel that excited by finding out more about Bleeding Gums Murphy's son, especially given that he never even mentioned having any family when he appeared in the past. That being said, like most episodes in this season, there were a chunk of good character moments. Murphy's son, Monk, was an enjoyable character, I thought. He was likeable enough to get me to want the best for him, and the ending delivered on that by being quite sweet in general, even if the first words Monk heard were, "Screw you, Bart." I also appreciated the actual deaf representation here. They did try to give a realistic view on that, and the fact that Monk's voice actor is actually deaf in real life obviously gives you an authentic perspective on it. Lisa was a bit too overbearing at times for me though. She wasn't awful or anything, but she was just always going on about something, and her voice became a bit of an irritant at certain points in the episode. You know how it is with her sometimes. I was just glad that Monk told her that he's not like a charity cause for her, he's his own person that wants his own thing. This wasn't that great as far as comedy goes, but I did enjoy some of the lottery bits, as well as the Bart prank I alluded to earlier. Season 33, Episode 18. My Octopus and a Teacher. Bart doesn't understand his feelings when he gets a new teacher. Meanwhile, Lisa befriends an octopus. This episode title is a reference to the 2020 Netflix documentary film, My Octopus Teacher, and my best moment was Homer's advice to Bart. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. It was at least interesting. They tried to explore how Bart and Lisa handle some new situations and some adversity, admittedly with mixed results. Abandoning Ned as Bart's new teacher in favour of getting a permanent replacement was probably for the best, and it was bound to happen eventually. Unfortunately, I never found the new teacher to be that interesting. She was quite bland because she was presented as this kind, caring figure and nothing more. Now I guess it was tolerable in this episode, but if she is going to feature more in the future, she kind of needs to develop more personality. As for Bart in this episode, I like the revelation of how he encountered her in the past, and the guilt he felt for yelling at her when she essentially saved his life. However, him having a crush on her on top of that felt a bit unnecessary. Not only has it been done before, his behaviour here seemed off to what his usual romantic urges are. He is normally either a dork, trying to show off, or is completely oblivious about the whole thing. Here, he actually gets violently jealous. Now, I'm not against Bart potentially changing after being put in new situations, but I would argue this was a clunky way of doing it. You already have the more compelling reason, which was the guilt Bart had messing with his mind, so to tack on a crush on top of that felt a bit much. Lisa's subplot was decent. It did throw up a moral dilemma for her about whether she should interfere and save the octopus from the shark. She got it wrong by interfering, I think, but hey, at least she returned the octopus back to the ocean in the end. Once again, this is not that funny, but Homer's actual sound advice to Bart, and inadvertently Lisa, went some way to making up for it. It's just nice to see Homer actually being a competent parent for once, you know? Season 33, Episode 19. Girls just Shauna have fun. When Lisa joins a high school marching band, she finds an unlikely mentor in Shauna Chalmers. Meanwhile, Homer becomes a beer brewer with Gary Chalmers. My trivia for this one is that Lisa and Shauna play Let Me Clear My Throat by DJ Cool, and my best moment was Chief Wiggum's speech to all the teenagers. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. It's no secret that I'm not a Shauna fan, but this was her best portrayal in my opinion. Sure, her one-tone voice and negative attitude still got a bit annoying, but at least her friendship with Lisa felt somewhat natural. Even though she would never admit it, I think Shauna likes the praise for actually having a useful skill, and enjoys her time playing with Lisa. Lisa seems to genuinely look up to her, so I'm sure it was a new form of responsibility she hasn't experienced before. Her abandoning Lisa at the party was not the best look though. At least they made up in the end, I suppose. Speaking of the party, I liked how it linked back into the Homer and Chalmers beer subplot. I enjoyed those two forming a friendship over beer, and the revelation that Homer screwed up, so the beer didn't have any alcohol content, was a clever way to have those two not be arrested. I also enjoyed Chief Wiggum here in general. He had the speech where he basically tells all the teenagers to get their act together. That may be out of character coming from him, but I kind of enjoyed him actually speaking a bit of sense for once. Not everything that comes out of his mouth has to be nonsensical babble. Saying that though, I did enjoy his dumb moment when he said, "They're already dead," in response to Lou saying that they registered a 0 on a breathalyzer. This was a funnier than average episode for this season in general, which helps cement this as a 4. Season 33, Episode 20, Marge the Meanie. Marge's former principal, Mrs. York, reveals that she was secretly a prankster in her school days. This gains her instant respect from Bart. So this episode was actually dedicated to Ian Wilcox, a former background artist for The Simpsons, who passed away on April 30th, 2022. And my best moment was Marge's prank on Helen Lovejoy. This one gets a 3 out of 5. I don't actually have a lot to say about this one. I mean, it was solid, with some interesting character dynamics at play, especially with Bart bonding with Marge over pranks. Those two hardly ever just have fun together, so it was nice to see for a short time, even if Marge was not actually liking it. It was interesting to see that Marge does have a more mischievous side in her, but at the end of the day, she is a moral person, so she represses it and never lets it out. The ending bit where she tricked Bart was also decent. The Homer-Lisa story never worked quite as well, simply because Homer never really liked Lisa's food, and the ending of it wasn't that great. It was very much a case of forcing a sweet moment that wasn't really earned or warranted. The entertainment here came pretty much exclusively from Bart and Marge's pranks. I liked how they got back at Comic Book Guy by spilling soda on his comics. At least he kind of deserved it. My favourite one though was seeing Helen get embarrassed after having her shopping read out. It's always satisfying to see her smug arrogance get brought down a peg or two. Season 33, Episode 21, Meat is Murder. Grandpa's old business partner is now a rich CEO, and he invites Abe to come back and work with him. My trivia for this one is that Gus sings Shameless Ostentation, a parody of Pure Imagination, from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And my best moment was Grandpa's rambling speech to prove his insanity. This one gets a 2 out of 5. This episode was up against it from the start, because we are expected to buy even more backstory related to Abe. I mean, what hasn't that guy done at this point? Still, some of the scenes with him enjoying the fruits of his old friend's labour were nice, and the angle that Lisa and Abe were being manipulated was interesting on paper, and could have easily led to an impactful conclusion. The board meeting at the end was set up in a very tense way. Sadly, it just ended up trying to be a bit too clever for its own good. The reveal that the guy was actually onto his kids' coup, and was just using Abe to out them, was okay by itself, but Abe being able to change his vote after he already gave it felt very convenient. Also, their business is hardly screwed just because there is a tie on a no confidence vote. I am sure there would be ways around that. Couldn't one of them just change their vote if it was that critical? At least Abe's rambling speech brought back some nostalgia of his ramblings of old, so that was something. This episode had some okay jokes, like Marge saying, "Grandpa, you love sitting," after he was offered the chance to sit on the board of directors. However, it also had some dumb political ones, which felt lame to me. I mean, what is Angela Merkel doing at the board meeting? If she has the most common sense in Europe, as this episode suggests, then it doesn't paint a great picture for Europe, I'm just gonna say that. This could have maybe scraped a 3 if it cut out some of the out of place moments and stuck the landing a bit better, but it didn't. So a 2 it very much is. Season 33, Episode 22, Poorhouse Rock. After Bart humiliates him at church, Homer finally finds a way to get his respect. That is until he gets a visit from a singing janitor who challenges his new viewpoint. My trivia for this one is that during the song, the CEO scene include Richie Rich, Rich Uncle Pennybags, and Scrooge McDuck. My best moment was Homer and Maggie teaming up to get out of church. So the season finale gets a 3 out of 5. I have very mixed thoughts on this one. To start off, I have to say the couch gag was very cool, so I have to give props for that. Onto the episode though, I thought the first half worked better than the second. I liked the bits at church, with how Maggie was quite happy to start crying and give Homer an excuse to leave. It also allowed him to eavesdrop on Bart's less than flattering presentation about him. At first, there was the usual squabbling between them, but I kind of liked how Bart gained a tad bit of respect for his dad after he was able to see that he does actually bring in a decent salary that keeps a good roof over their heads. The focus then switched quite dramatically in the second half, when the episode essentially turned into a political satire in musical form. It was very on-the-nose stuff, not at all subtle, but I guess that was the point, and it did point out how crappy the political system is. It also made the very gloomy observation that the modern generation are going to have it incredibly hard. That is true in certain ways. I mean, no doubt the older generation had it easier in terms of getting jobs and actually being able to save up to buy a house of their own. But there are positives to being young today as well. I mean, it's never been easier to gain more information and to research things because of the internet. And statistically speaking, there has never been a better time to live in terms of health and life expectancy and things of that nature. So it swings and roundabouts really. The most important thing, regardless of what time period you're born in, has always been empowering yourself and getting the most out of your abilities as possible. So if you focus on doing that, you are already on a good path. Now, it doesn't guarantee success, but it's much better than sitting around whining about how bad life is all the time. Anyway, back to this episode. The satire was okay, but to be honest, I did enjoy the simple Homer and Bart story in the first half a lot more. Overall, this ended up being an average end to the season. So that's season 33 done, and here is a summary of the season. The overall average score was bang on 3, which is the best since season 20 and season 19, so it's definitely a positive thing. I probably would call this season meh overall, rather than bad, which is long overdue I guess. In general, I would argue this season feels more like a teen season in terms of quality than a HD season. It still had its fair share of bad episodes though, so my bottom 5 were Meet His Murder at 5, Pretty Little Liar at 4, The Star of the Backstage at 3, Treehouse of Horror 32 at 2, and Mothers and Other Strangers as the worst. In terms of the top 5, not only did we have enough 4-rated episodes to fill out the top 5, we actually had one extra, so A Serious Flanders Part 2 deserves an honourable mention I guess, for being a 4 out of 5 that misses out. The actual list consists of Girls Just Shauna Have Fun at 5, Boyz N the Highlands at 4, A Serious Flanders Part 1 at 3, Bart's in Jail at 2, and as the only 5 out of 5, Pixelated and Afraid is very much the best. As I said, this season was definitely a step up from the recent ones, and was probably the best HD season as a whole. Well, maybe you could argue season 20, but that was technically only half HD anyway. What I liked best about this season in particular was the character writing. In fairness, the past few seasons were building something in regards to this, but this season improved on it again. Some of the best scenes were just simple ones of characters talking about their lives and talking through their problems. It all felt quite authentic and realistic. This was not only true for the main family, who were fairly balanced in this season, but also to any one-off characters they introduced. The season may not have been that ambitious with wacky plots, but it did try new formats, and it did experiment with its characters, and try to put them in new situations. After 33 seasons of the show, I can definitely appreciate that effort, as it can't be easy. The main weakness of this season was the same as pretty much every HD season. It wasn't as funny as I'd have liked. Now there was the odd laugh-worthy moment to be sure, just not enough of them. I wouldn't describe this season as boring though, because as I said, even when the jokes were subpar, the stories and characters were often interesting enough to pick up some of the slack. So in conclusion for this video, this season was a decent watch, and it is showing a positive trajectory for the series. I can only hope it continues that going forward. Speaking of which, I will review season 34 when it's done, which should be sometime in late May, and after that I will make a recap of the entire series and all my stats on it. In the meantime though, I will have some other content out on the channel, so be sure to go and have your say on that in the community section. That is all for this one though guys. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope you all have a great day.